With or without Turkey, the U.S. military buildup continues. The official count so far, some 232,000 Americans are now in the region, including 700 U.S. Air Force aircraft, 300 naval aircraft, and 5 naval battle groups. Here's NBC's Dana Lewis with the 101st Airborne Division in Kuwait.
Clouds of sand in the Kuwaiti desert, kicked up by the downwash of Apache gunships. A total of 250 helicopters are being shipped from the Army's 101st Air Assault Group in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, to a port in Kuwait. Today, the first to arrive, flowing out to this air base just miles from the Iraqi border. For pilot Bruce Carson, it's deja vu. He was here in 1991, flew 100 missions in the first Gulf War. Now he's ready for a second, but perhaps very different showdown with Iraqi forces.
Maybe a little bit more desperate this time than they were last time.
Chief Warrant Officer Thomas Weers helps pilot hone battlefield tactics. He says the threat in Iraq is not to be underestimated.
We know that their capabilities in their backyard, from our intelligence and what we've been briefed, they're number 3 in the air defense systems in the world.
Here at this desert airfield, commanders say the 101st Apache attack helicopters are the final installment in the build-up to war. But it will be until at least midweek until all of the helicopters are on the ground and ready for combat missions.
Helicopters still touching down and soldiers too. Today, 350 more arrived at the 101st Desert Base known as Camp New York. More are due in tomorrow, as just the 101st has close to 20,000 soldiers ready for war. Problem: some of their equipment, including artillery and transport, may take another 2 weeks to arrive. At the log-jammed Kuwaiti military port, only the first of 5 ships for the 101st has docked.
We still have a steady flow coming in, so I think we'll be gainfully employed for a while here.
Apaches delivered from ship to shore could soon be hovering over sand dunes in Iraq.
I think they should think, what's the quickest way I can surrender? Because we are going to bring lethal firepower down upon them like they've never seen before.
American commanders ready to fight now, but hoping for just a little more time to get all of their firepower on the ground. Dana Lewis, NBC News, in the Kuwaiti desert.
This is Dana Lewis in the Kuwaiti desert. Less than a week ago, these soldiers were doing training drills at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Today, the same drills, but new urgency. Now they are just miles from the Iraqi border. The exercise, trench warfare. How to take down a dug-in enemy. Soldiers from the 101st Airborne Division in these trenches, moving towards bunkers. Bunkers which potentially guard everything from chemical factories to airports, even the city of Baghdad itself. Not one combat veteran in this squad. How many of you have never been in battle before? 20-year-old Chris Webb from Kentucky was only 8 years old in the last Gulf War.
Urban warfare concerns me. I mean, there's too many places to hide. There's too many doors. There's too many corners.
That's a rangefinder right there.
Colonel Joe Anderson says there are fears Saddam has booby-trapped defensive positions, including trenches. He's put oil in them?
He can flood them, he can burn them, he can obstacle them, he can do a lot of things to make it more difficult to maneuver through these legs.
The 101st has almost 20,000 troops now in Kuwait, but much of its fighting gear is still at sea. Only 2 of 5 ships have docked. The rest won't be here for another week and a half, carrying critical shipments of artillery, ammunition, and Humvees.
Our soldiers are ready to go, and our combat capability grows with every additional ship when it lands.
But the airborne muscle of the 101st is already here. 70 Apache gunships. The Apaches, battle-tested in Afghanistan, will be key in Iraq.
Ferocious. You don't want to be on the receiving end of what this aircraft can put out.
The Apaches will fly cover for the 101st. Protection to let the Screaming Eagles go as deep as they need to inside Iraq. Dana Lewis, NBC News, in the Kuwaiti desert.
In the Kuwait desert at this hour, it is already early Thursday morning, and all along the border with Iraq, American forces are dug in and ready to move out. But in the meantime, it's the waiting game, and the challenge is to stay ready, run the drills, try not to think too much about the unknown. NBC's Dana Lewis tonight with the rituals of the 101st Airborne. troops with sand in their boots.
Far from home, 2 American soldiers take the oath to protect their country, again. Already 5 years in the Army, Sergeant Joshua Hollick could have re-enlisted back at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, but he decided to do it here.
To know that I re-enlisted in Kuwait and so close to Iraq, it's just something that kind of touches inside, you know.
Now, Sergeant Hollick, like the rest of the 101st Airborne, trains and waits. Waits to see if there will be a war and try to adjust to life in the desert.
This is where you come to wash your hands. Dirty, sandy. Problem is, not much water in a desert.
There's lots of food, though. 4,500 hungry soldiers go through the line in 30 minutes. And constant reminders to stay alert. A drill for gas attacks. 9 seconds to get masks on. 40 soldiers crowd into one small bunker.
Push down! A million things go through your mind. You actually don't know if it's real or if it's a drill.
This is home, an Army tent. We share it with 16 soldiers in here. There's always somebody sleeping here because they've been working all night. Somebody else is awake, he's on shift. This is my cot over here. This is where I sleep, right next to an M16.
While some sleep, an American flag under this soldier's bed, Sergeant Jason Reddick passes the time by cleaning his weapon.
I work up in the talk in the morning, and I get off and I come here and mess with this a little bit. And listen to music, and it's time to go to bed, and you just get up and do the same thing over again, so.
And over again.
And over again.
The question on his mind, like everyone else's here, when will the war start?
It's frustrating not knowing what's going on, when we're going, where we're going.
Sergeant Derek Hoffer breaks the monotony by writing to his fiancée.
Allison, I miss you. I hope to see you soon.
In the desert, young Americans ready for war and waiting. Dana Lewis, NBC News, in the Kuwaiti desert.
Of course, there's been a lot of talk about the dangers of delaying any combat until April when it begins to get very hot in the desert. There are also concerns about beginning the attack under a full moon. But as NBC's Dana Lewis tells us tonight, the troops in place are already getting a harsh lesson in another hazard of desert warfare, sandstorms right out of Lawrence of Arabia.
An American soldier lost in his own camp in the Kuwaiti desert. Within minutes, high winds create a blinding sandstorm. The soldier finds a tent, but not the right one. The storm forces us to shut down the NBC satellite dish before it's carried off by 35-mile-per-hour winds. 5 hours later, the storm blows through Camp New York, leaving many complaining of sore throats and difficulty breathing.
Runny noses, stuffy eyes, conjunctivitis, sinusitis, coughing, postnasal drip.
The sandstorms, called schmalls here, form in under 3 minutes. Typical winds in excess of 30 miles per hour, and they can reach heights of 5,000 feet. Today, as a precaution, in a desert live fire exercise, infantrymen forced to wear ballistic goggles to protect their eyes from the blowing sand.
And for a soldier in the field, sandstorms can be a nightmare. Reduced visibility means a soldier could mistake a friend for a foe. A big problem in the last Gulf War, and it's difficult to find the enemy.
Our ability to move is going to be initially dependent on the weather. You know, if we got one of those desert smalls, you know, even though our pilots are extremely brave, we won't be able to fly on it.
The sand can damage the engines of the Apache attack helicopters, so after every mission, engines are flushed with water. At the 101st Tactical Assault Center, commanders say weather could even stall the war.
Weapons, helicopters, vehicles, engines, filters will all be disrupted by the dust in the air.
In this desert, ferocious sandstorms may turn out to be the most unpredictable threat of all. Dana Lewis, NBC News, in the Kuwaiti desert. This is Dana Lewis with the 101st Airborne. In the midst of training for war, for a brief moment today, these U.S. soldiers here in the Kuwaiti desert stopped, put their helmets and M16s down on a sandy chapel floor, and turned their attention to prayer. Still wearing bulletproof vests, but holding Bibles instead of guns.
Army chaplains say since deploying here, the number of soldiers attending Sunday services has doubled. Young men and women so close to war, contemplating mortality.
And on this Army base, religious boundaries are blurred. Chaplains from every faith form a religious platoon to provide spiritual counseling. Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, chaplains will follow soldiers to war, unarmed but assigned bodyguards.
What's up?
Chaplain Richard Compton visits every tent, each battalion, offering support, kind words, friendship to ease the isolation of being so far away from home.
Loneliness. Loneliness is the biggest thing right now with these guys. Fear to some extent, but fear will come more once things start moving.
Sean Stoner, a sergeant for Bravo Company, his wife Maria is back in Tennessee pregnant with twins. Now he sought comfort from the chaplain.
Just putting, spiritual matters at, kind of at ease, and rest assured that that area is covered.
There are a handful of Muslim soldiers praying in this makeshift house of prayer. Waleed Gaber says the war is not about Muslim against Muslim. It's only about Saddam.
The cause that I'm fighting for is to save a lot of people from this tyrant.
Every chaplain says dying is something almost every soldier has asked about. What did they tell them?
Get them fired up, get them energized, use that fear to keep you alive.
So today, prayer keeps spirits high for Americans who could soon go into harm's way. Dana Lewis, NBC News, in the Kuwaiti Desert.
On the ground in Kuwait, it is already early Tuesday morning, and American forces are gearing up and in some cases moving up, preparing for the invasion that now seems to be all but inevitable. NBC's Dana Lewis tonight with the 101st Airborne.
Know that you're ready. Are you ready?
Three-star General William Wallace rallying his troops. The man who is the Army ground commander for an Iraqi war, visiting each battalion of the 101st Airborne, giving them a heads up about the ultimatum President Bush is delivering Saddam tonight.
I think what he's going to tell Saddam Hussein and his regime is they got one last final chance to disarm, but we're going to come do it for them.
While battle planning continues here in the 101st Tactical Operations Center, vital gear, including transportation and artillery, is still on a ship that won't be arriving in Kuwait until tomorrow.
At the 101st Forward Air Refueling Point, last-minute zeroing of gun sights on Apache attack helicopters.
More force, more pressure.
And other preparations, too. A class on how to deal with prisoners of war, taught by a New Orleans policeman called up in the reserves.
I see your knee on the other side of him.
And a military lawyer on the difficult choices U.S. troops may have to make in Iraq.
He's going to put guns near daycare centers. And he's going to sit there and smile while we are forced to decide whether or not we're going to fire back and possibly hurt children.
Despite all the preparation, even for a general sending soldiers, many of them 20 years old, into war is difficult.
But regardless,
you can't let your emotions get in the way of sound military tactical judgment. But it makes you swallow hard every once in a while. Sure does.
Soldiers of the 101st today, ready to go to war, singing a song from World War II. We have a rendezvous with destiny. Dana Lewis, NBC News, in the Kuwaiti Desert.
Operation Desert Storm 12 years ago was the first major American combat in which women played a conspicuous part, mostly as pilots and in rear echelon positions. Now, in Operation Iraqi Freedom, even more women will be in the ranks. And as NBC's Dana Lewis reports, with every war, they are inching closer to the front lines.
Elena Irajo is a long way from her home in Seattle, Washington. She says her mother wanted her to be a lawyer or a doctor. Instead, today, she was driving a Humvee across the Kuwaiti desert and blowing camouflage smoke. She's a lieutenant in the Chemical Detection Unit. The smoke is to help the infantry advance on the enemy undetected.
Just like every other soldier, we're going over here to defend our country and to help out in any way we can.
And she is treated just like any other soldier, sharing a tent with a dozen other women and men.
10 years in infantry, no females. It's different, same.
From mechanics to truck drivers to lawyers, women are playing a key role here. Women now make up 15% of the active duty force, more than 200,000. But if you add in the reservists, there are almost 420,000 women in the armed services.
Technically, women are still not allowed to go into so-called frontline trigger positions. But over time, commanders have slowly relaxed the rules, allowing women to go deeper into war zones.
Captain Jennifer Wellington doesn't just go into the danger zone, she pulls the trigger on the most ferocious helicopter flying, the Apache. Captain Wellington will fly to battle armed with Hellfire missiles and rockets and 30mm cannons.
If you can do the job equally or better, then I have no problem with women in combat. You know, I try to do the best job that I can, and hopefully my peers think that I do that. So I never have any doubt about me going forward.
And no doubt, women bring something special to the job.
I think we're more level-headed, but that's just me. And I think faster, maybe, I don't know. More calm.
But the men wouldn't agree with you on that.
Oh, sure they would. Don't let them fool you.
A feeling shared by Lieutenant Araujo.
The Army is a machine, and if all the pieces were the same, the machine wouldn't work.
Today, Lieutenant Araujo's unit was ordered to pack up and be prepared to move, an order that will eventually take her into Iraq. Dana Lewis, NBC News in the Kuwaiti desert.
This has been a demanding and difficult day. Many of them, the Marines and the 3rd Infantry Division, are moving forward. Other units are waiting to see where they're needed, but as they wait, they are exposed to Saddam Hussein's missiles and possible chemical attacks. NBC's Dana Lewis tonight with the 101st Airborne. Dana, you're under alert there, I gather, at the moment.
I am, Tom. Roller coaster day for troops out here in the desert. The near constant whine of sirens forcing us to don these masks, come out to the bunkers as we are now. This siren just went off about 10 minutes ago, and we're sitting here waiting for an all clear or some indication as to what this was. Was it another missile or was it not? All of this fraying the nerves of young American soldiers.
12:45 Kuwaiti time, the alarm sounds at Camp New York. Soldiers from the 101st caught off guard. Still intense, they understand this is no drill. Incoming missiles, the first of the war. A bunker offers protection from explosions and shrapnel.
As you can see, all of these soldiers, they have now moved into the bunkers.
In chemical drills, soldiers often talk and joke in the bunker. Today, an eerie silence.
Is it unnerving for you?
Yeah, anytime you're going to get insecticide for people on you, it is. I mean, who wouldn't it be unnerving for?
28 minutes, we get the all-clear signal. No sign of chemical or biological agents. We can leave the bunker. Sergeant Ken Krause fought in the First Gulf War, lived in one of these chemical suits for a month. His job to train soldiers to stay safe. And today, he prays he trained them well.
I've talked with a few of them that are truly nervous about all this, and I try to reassure them that I have tested a lot of this gear. It works.
Should I take these shoes off? Today, he tells me to check my suit. A mix-up in serial numbers means some soldiers got 2 pants or 2 jackets instead of pants and a jacket. My suit checks out. 5:30, a warning the Iraqis will fire more missiles. First, soldiers are told helmets and body armor only. There are reports, and I don't know the exact basis for them, that there may be an incoming heavy barrage of missiles from Iraq, and that may happen within the next 15 to 20 minutes. Then the alarm sounds for gas masks. The entire base, hundreds of soldiers run for bunkers. And over the next hour, from daylight to dusk, we mask and unmask, do it all over again 3 times. Soldiers emerge exhausted, frayed nerves.
We just sit here and wait for the Scuds or whatever to come at us. And so it's just the nerve-wracking of waiting for something to happen.
Tonight, his fellow soldiers crowd around a TV monitor, straining to hear any news on units already fighting across the Iraqi border.
And Tom, in the last 2 hours, we have now had 3 of these attacks, 3 of these sirens go off. I can tell you that in the last 2, of course, we don't know the outcome of this one. In the last 2, they were confirmed missile launches from Iraq, and the missiles, we're told, landed harmlessly in the desert. No indication that there was any chemical or biological agents involved in those missiles. Back to you, Tom.
Thanks very much, NBC's Dana Lewis tonight with the 101st On the ground in Kuwait today, NBC's Dana Lewis is with the 101st Airborne, enduring another day of Iraqi missile strikes aimed at them, but gratefully, so far, all missing. Dana?
Hi, Tom. U.S. forces continue to try and track these missile launches coming out of southern Iraq. So far, no luck in trying to stop the attacks or destroying the mobile launchers.
For the 8th time in 24 hours, Iraqis fire a missile at U.S. forces. Tonight in the Kuwaiti desert, soldiers don masks and wait in bunkers, while a Patriot missile downs the incoming Ababil 100, part of Saddam's arsenal of missiles permitted under UN regulations. U.S. military intelligence sources say the Iraqis have played a game of hide and seek, firing mobile launchers in southern Iraq even as American forces invade.
Normally they'll park them in either warehouses or buildings. They'll park them in a wooded area, some sort of wooded grove.
Tonight, one brigade of the 101st Airborne is moving into Iraq, preparing forward refueling points for their Apache attack helicopters to operate closer to Baghdad. Something else to speed the 101st's advance, Colonel Joe Anderson says, is the Blue Force Tracker, like this unit in his Humvee that helps identify friend from foe in Iraq. For American forces, it limits the risk of fellow troops accidentally firing on one another.
It allows you to see the friendly units on the battlefield so you know where they are, and that's an actual location based on an antenna that tracks it so you know where they, no kidding, are.
American units on the move transmit locations to satellites and down to commanders. Blue marks American forces, red the enemy. And right now in this tactical operations center, imagery from Iraq shows so far there is not much opposition.
Lots of blue, red's getting smaller.
Tonight, a special dinner of steak and lobster for soldiers from the 101st, soon to be sent into Iraq. Then soldiers crowded around a small TV to watch the fires burn in Baghdad, concerned about the human cost of this war.
As a soldier, you just got to tough it up.
Throughout the weekend, Tom, more soldiers from the 101st are expected to cross the border into Iraq, and eventually it's expected that they may link up with units from the 3rd Mechanized Infantry, and together, if it's called for, they may assault Baghdad as a team of the two units marrying up outside of Baghdad. Back to you.
Thanks very much, NBC's Dana Lewis tonight with the 101st. And late word tonight that there was some kind of an attack on a unit of the 101st Airborne still at its post in Kuwait. We're going to get the latest on that now from NBC's Dana Lewis. Dana, what do we know about this?
Hello, Tom. This has happened just down the road from us. It is indeed in Kuwait. It is a camp known as Camp Pennsylvania, where members of the 101st were getting ready, we're told, to move out and go into Iraq. According to a spokesman at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, for the 101st, George Heath, terrorists penetrated the camp. They threw at least 2 grenades into a tent, and I can tell you that all of these tents have up to about 16 soldiers inside. We are told initial reports indicate that 10 people have been injured, 6 seriously, and I was just listening to some radio traffic. They have been calling for medevac units to helicopter them out. They have called for several medevacs, and we know that each one carries 4 wounded, so indeed that would confirm that there are at least more than 4 wounded, Tom. And we know also that security has been greatly increased at all of these camps in the last few days. This has been a fear that there could be infiltrations across the border and attempts to attack American forces getting ready to move into Iraq, and this is what may have happened in the middle of the night here today.
For members of the 101st Airborne Division still in Kuwait, the closest enemy was not the Iraqi army, it turns out. NBC's Dana Lewis tonight has the shocking story of an American soldier who's accused of launching a deadly attack on his fellow servicemen in the middle of the night.
American soldiers ambushed as they slept in their tents. At Camp Pennsylvania, the attacker first knocked out a generator that supplied electricity, then rolled grenades into 3 tents and opened fire. 1 soldier died, 15 injured, including the 1st Brigade Colonel Ben Hodges, later released from the hospital.
Middle of the night, explosion, smoke, and nobody, of course, knows what's going on.
At nearby Camp New York, alarms sounded as a precaution. Was a terrorist attack underway? Soldiers took up defensive positions. Then the word. This attack on the 101st was reportedly done by one of its own, a military engineer, identified by the Army as Sergeant Hassan Akbar, an American Muslim, taken into custody in a nearby bunker. A high-ranking Army source tells NBC News Akbar allegedly carried out the attack because he opposes the war. The 101st says the attack has not seriously affected its battle plan. Today, soldiers climbed on board helicopters heading for Iraq, but the attack shook up young soldiers.
It's pretty scary not knowing what's going to happen with our own people.
Tonight, military spokesmen say 3 soldiers had to undergo surgery, their conditions listed as serious. But most of the other soldiers have now been released from hospital, and the 101st Airborne is moving forward to play its role in the war in Iraq. Dana Lewis, NBC News in the Kuwaiti Desert.
This is Dana Lewis in Kifl, south of Karbala. Today, an airborne assault. Soldiers from the 101st Airborne Strike Brigade took over this town, relieving tanks and armored personnel carriers from the 3rd Mechanized Infantry. The town has been the scene of heavy fighting, partly because of its key bridges over the Euphrates River. Trucks and cars overturned, burned out. They litter the streets. Fired upon by U.S. forces when they tried to charge American Army checkpoints.
U.S. forces now being told to fire on any vehicle that even looks like it won't stop at an American checkpoint. In the last 3 days, according to commanders, 1,200 Iraqis in this area have been killed trying to run checkpoints manned by tanks and armored personnel carriers.
Colonel Joe Anderson claims members of the Iraqi regime forced some residents to attack American soldiers under threat of death.
A, it appears through coercion is how they're making them do that, and then B, through threats of violence or force to say, do this for us or die.
The fighting continued today. At this Army post, 4 mortars exploding 200 feet away from us, a close call. The decision is made to relocate down the road. As we do, sniper fire.
Okay, we've just had shots fired in our direction from over the berm, just in between those buildings.
The gunman disappears. Only a few residents walk the street. Tonight, more mortars and gunfire echo across this town as U.S. forces tighten their grip on Kifl. Dana Lewis, NBC News in central Iraq.
The 101st Airborne Division now has surrounded the holy city of Najaf, near the place where 4 U.S. soldiers were killed in that suicide bombing yesterday. Najaf is a critical but dangerous target on the road to Baghdad. NBC's Dana Lewis is just north of there with the 101st.
Touching down in the dusty Iraqi desert by day is dangerous enough, but after 2 Apaches from the 101st Airborne Division crashed this weekend because of the dust and sand, today the 101st Apaches have been grounded at night as a safety precaution. But the 101st was still on the move in central Iraq, tightening up security at roadblocks today.
Soldiers are being so careful moving down these roads. This morning it took us 1 hour just to go a few miles. Every time a civilian vehicle approaches an Army vehicle, it is stopped, either ordered back or searched.
This morning, the Army destroyed 3 cars and a dump truck carrying Iraqi soldiers. Commanders say the Iraqis refused to stop for U.S. soldiers. Today, 1st Infantry Division searched this warehouse, finding gas masks they believe may have belonged to the Iraqi Army, adding to the fear Saddam may use chemical and biological weapons. Dana Lewis, NBC News, Kifl, Iraq.
One of the American units expected to have a primary role in the battle for Baghdad is the 101st Airborne. It's now on the move north, and it's encountering stiff resistance along the way, very stiff in some instances. NBC's Dana Lewis is traveling with the 101st tonight. He has this report on the fighting on the road to Baghdad.
On a little highway approaching Al-Hala, American tanks ran into a major ambush yesterday. Out of the dust and haze came a hail of gunfire from Iraqi soldiers, driving trucks and jeeps and even taxis.
The Iraqi army had been laying in wait for days on this road. As the Americans came north, they opened fire with everything they had. Automatic machine gun fire, rocket-propelled grenades. Most of the fire came from these buildings alongside the road.
And the Americans answered with everything they had, outgunning them, leaving hundreds dead.
One American soldier from the 101st Airborne died on top of a tank. The battle lasted for several hours. Today, the road was still littered with signs of heavy fighting. Captain Brad Loudon says units from 270 Armor never trained for this kind of fighting back at their home base in Kansas.
These are desperate people doing desperate things in order to survive, and they're throwing everything they've got at us.
But it just wasn't the regular Iraqi Army U.S. forces took on. Army commanders were surprised to find Saddam's elite Republican guards, too, especially so far south of Baghdad, 65 miles from the capital.
There's 3 or 4 major approaches that lead into Baghdad. So he's going to protect those as far south as he can.
Captain Loudon says the Iraqi soldiers used cowardly tactics, boarding a bus in the middle of the battle and using women and children as human shields. American soldiers fired upon, fired back.
Soldiers had to do the unimaginable, it's the unthinkable.
The Army says no women were killed in the fighting, but several, including a pregnant mother, were wounded. Today, signs the Iraqi Army may try to counterattack. American tank units ready to stand their ground, blocking the road south from Baghdad. Dana Lewis, NBC News in south central Iraq.
There was near chaos for a time today in Najaf in southern Iraq when panicked citizens took to the streets to defend one of their holiest sites. It was a stark example of one of the greatest challenges facing the troops, trying to reassure Iraq and the entire Arab world that the war against Saddam Hussein is not a war against Islam. NBC's Dana Lewis is with the 101st Airborne.
In the center of this holy Muslim city, angry crowds confronted U.S. soldiers, upset that troops might try to enter the Ali Mosque in pursuit of Iraqi gunmen. The gunmen had been firing on U.S. soldiers.
Imam Ali, no. Imam Ali, no. Okay.
The U.S. soldiers retreated, and for the most part, American troops have been warmly welcomed.
Thank you. Thank you.
By thousands of Iraqis, many curious enough to wait hours just to get a glimpse of them.
Hello, Mr.
Today, the 101st Airborne continued their hunt for Iraqi soldiers and paramilitary holdouts in Najaf. The Army says up to a dozen schools were used as temporary camps by Iraqi soldiers. The Iraqis fled, leaving behind huge stashes of weapons. Here's 6,000 rounds, 40 mortars, 4 dozen rocket-propelled grenades. As the Army moved in, one Iraqi braved incoming artillery fire to warn American troops of landmines. In a field, tank crews had passed over, unaware of the buried danger. Suddenly, we were in the center of it.
Right now, we've been told we are walking in the middle of a minefield. Tanks have already come through here. We're keeping our steps on their tracks, not moving to either side, or we could step on a mine.
We made it through safely, but just as tanks sprayed machine gun fire on the ground, detonating hidden mines, one Humvee drove the wrong way and hit one. The right side of the vehicle destroyed. Luckily, soldiers were sitting on the other side.
Big explosion, kind of shock. Big dust cloud. I didn't even know what happened until I got out.
The landmines and the man's friendly warning, 2 very different examples of the welcome that may be awaiting U.S. forces further up the road. Dana Lewis, NBC News, on Najaf.
As the vice tightens around Baghdad, coalition forces still face pockets of fierce resistance. And there's a dangerous new development. Foreign fighters, volunteers for Saddam. We have 2 reports from the front lines, beginning with NBC's Dana Lewis with the 101st Airborne near Karbala.
U.S. forces stormed Karbala just before noon, firing artillery rounds into the city and calling in airstrikes. We approached one area of the city echoing with gunfire and explosions. This unit of the 101st was returning fire on an Iraqi position. Machine guns and grenade launchers directing fire at a house.
Just before dark here, a firefight in this Iraqi neighborhood. Members of the 101st Airborne say there may be gunmen inside, most likely Republican Guard. They've been firing back. Heavy gunfire coming from the tops of the building and also from the windows.
A bullet bounced off the Humvee carrying this group of soldiers. As Lieutenant Jason Wayne says he was surprised that outgunned and outnumbered Iraqi soldiers fought on.
It looks like they came to play ball, you know, and hey, we're here for the whole 9 innings, so we'll see what happens.
American forces continue to find large weapon stashes, and today they uncovered a kind of war room set up by Saddam's paramilitary units.
They do use, as they continue to have used, schools, hospitals for caches, to fight at it, to have their headquarters in. So our job is to try and minimize how much we destroy while trying to defeat them.
Late today in this holy city for Shia Muslims, crowds came out to wave at and welcome U.S. soldiers. But many asked for water. It's been turned off for 10 days, they say. Saddam's image may be chipped and bullet damaged here, but no one wants to say when his regime will finally fall.
I would never speculate on when this might be over. It's over when it's over, and we'll fight until it is.
The U.S. Army overwhelming any Iraqi opposition. Dana Lewis, NBC News, Karbala.
For some U.S. troops, this Sunday was a time to slow down their march to Baghdad, to stay put, and to solidify coalition control. NBC's Dana Lewis is with the 101st Airborne in Karbala, southwest of the capital city.
In the heart of Karbala this morning, American Bradleys firing 25mm cannons. Soldiers frantically searching for the source of incoming fire. Only a few Iraqi units still trying to put up a fight against overwhelming firepower.
First we took a mortar round, now there's small arms fire in the area. Troops moving up the road. Helicopters now trying to search, see where the fire is coming from. Is it on a rooftop? Somebody in between buildings? Very difficult to find the source of fire in this environment.
Yesterday, a Bradley was destroyed here in fighting. Today, they take no chances when they find the source of fire. Platoon Sergeant David Wardlow says his Bradley has been shot at 16 times.
We're like hair of our teeth, skin of our teeth, basically getting by it.
Go, 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 go! Soldiers from the 101st Airborne are sent to search for gunmen inside the buildings. Bravo Company Specialist Brandon Holzer says finding a sniper frustrating, dangerous.
It's just one man running around with one magazine.
And a box of bullets.
A box of bullets, and if he gets found, he drops the gun and runs, hides.
The Bravo Company patrol lasts for 6 grueling hours, temperature near 100 degrees. People come out of their homes to wave and watch. And today, the U.S. Army and residents of Karbala work together to topple the last symbol here of Saddam's rule. Dana Lewis, NBC News, Karbala.
And in the last week or so, there have been about a half a dozen sweeps of suspected Iraqi biological and chemical weapon sites. Today, the latest one, the 101st Airborne, found a cache of what preliminary reports suggest could be evidence of chemical weapons. Could be. NBC's Dana Lewis is some 20 miles southeast of Karbala tonight with the 101st.
Special chemical detection units called Foxes arriving in Albu Muhawisu to check out this suspected chemical site. NBC News today led into the site by the 101st Airborne Strike Brigade, which discovered it yesterday.
U.S. forces came to this agricultural factory because of an intelligence tip-off. A former Iraqi colonel telling them that barrels of chemical were buried behind this building in a pit.
Wearing gas masks, we see 14 barrels, 25-gallon and 55-gallon drums hidden in this bunker. The U.S. Army says it ran a series of field tests using Fox mobile detection equipment. Preliminary tests, which often prove to be false, found a deadly cocktail of possible sarin and tabin nerve agent, as well as a mustard agent known as lewisite. Former Chief UN Inspector David Kay.
So there's reason to be suspicious, but there's a lot of reason to want to be very confident before you've announced that you've found a smoking gun.
The military will do more accurate testing in the United States, which they say could take several days.
And I think that the prudent thing in a case like this would be to kind of let the thing play itself out.
Weapons, including rocket-propelled grenades and rifles, were also found in the building which produces pesticides. But these drums, above ground, not hidden, did not test positive for nerve agents. Chemical experts believe this could be a dual-usage site, the pesticide production a front for chemical weapons production. And on the same street, the U.S. Army has discovered a guerrilla training center containing weapons and thousands of chemical protection suits. Tomorrow, samples of the chemical cocktail in these barrels will be sent for testing in the U.S. Dana Lewis, NBC News, near Karbala.
At the same Pentagon tonight. Back now to Baghdad, where much of the story in the capital city continues to be in the streets. The celebrations and jubilation that we saw earlier this week have given way to an atmosphere that can best be described as the Wild, Wild West. Americans from the 101st Airborne are spending their first night in the middle of all that, and NBC's Dana Lewis is with them.
At noon, an air assault on southern Baghdad. Black Hawk and Chinook helicopters come in low, a tactic to avoid Iraqi air defenses. 1,200 soldiers from the 101st Strike Brigade, their first look at the city, a city in chaos. Columns of smoke rise from Baghdad. This factory fire sparked by a bomb strike on an Iraqi missile site. Several government ministries are burning. Not the oil ministry, it's guarded by U.S. forces. One of the first stops for the 101st Airborne, a palace of Saddam Hussein. Inside, it's stripped of almost everything. Outside, cars and trucks loaded with chandeliers and furniture. They even took the toilets. This man says Saddam stole all of this money to build his big homes. We're just taking back what is ours.
People are very poor. Saddam Hussein rich. Thank you, America. Thank you, America. Thank you, America.
On the main highway into Baghdad, hundreds of people have been going into factories carrying off anything they can in their arms and in their trucks. The Army says it can't deal with looting. It is going to hunt down the enemy, then it will try to restore order.
I think pace can be an issue, and I think success, winning the hearts and minds and providing some sense of security here could be an issue.
Just before nightfall, the neighborhood came out to greet the 101st. The children fascinated by the Americans. Soldiers return the warmth. A mother with a sick child receives Army medical help. Soldiers turning their attention here from fighting the enemy to comforting the country. Dana Lewis, NBC News, Baghdad.
No.
Now to the chaos in Baghdad. While U.S. forces have begun enforcing an evening curfew, some Iraqis are demanding that U.S. forces prevent more looting and provide the city with some security. We have two reports, beginning with NBC's Dana Lewis.
270 Armor out of Fort Riley, Kansas, finding another anti-aircraft gun in this Baghdad suburb, blowing it to pieces. Still some paramilitary holdouts, but fighting in the city is light, surprisingly so.
They put up a determined fight for various periods, but each time in each city and eventually in Baghdad, the resistance did just collapse under the weight of mass fires.
And now one of the biggest stashes of weapons found in Baghdad so far in one of the most surprising places. Next to the Ferris wheel, just up from the funhouse, right under the clown's nose, rockets and mortars. In a children's amusement park, hundreds of cases of ammunition and weapons. Stacked to the roof in a girl's bathroom, some found next to the Swan ride. The Army says 150 paramilitaries had turned the park into an armed fortress.
The manager said that about a few days before the U.S. started hitting Baghdad, they just left and abandoned the place.
More weapons found today in one of Uday's houses, the son of Saddam Hussein. Crates of it, including gold-plated rifles. The inscription, a gift from Saddam. Fires continue to burn in the city. In this corner variety store, Ahmed says since the war, prices for items like candy and eggs have tripled. Last time he bought milk or meat or vegetables for his daughter 2 months ago. Yet he is thankful for the presence of American soldiers, as long as it's not an occupation.
We want freedom. Freedom not just from Saddam. We want freedom also from America and British. Okay?
Freedom and order. Looters have struck at everything, including military bases. They cleaned out this Republican Guard camp, leaving only a few tattered pieces of uniforms. Some of the losses are priceless. Staff at Baghdad's Antiquities Museum blamed U.S. troops for not protecting treasures. Nabhal Amin wept and claimed antiquities dating back thousands of years worth billions of dollars had been destroyed. U.S. forces continue to watch looters waving white flags and making clean getaways. Dana Lewis, NBC News, Baghdad. The U.S. Army brought out loudspeakers today warning Iraqi residents in Baghdad stop looting and leave all government buildings. Once the shooting stops, this will be the Army's secret weapon, the Civil Affairs Unit. Its mission, turn right side up the lives of Iraqis turned upside down in the last month.
We want to build trust with the Iraqi people, that they can see us, that we're here to help them, and that we're here to help build the bridge between them and us.
Call them the Fix-It Patrol. Today, the soldiers found the manager of a water station who turned off the switches and fled the bombing. Thanks to these guys, the water in this neighborhood is pumping again. It may not be glamorous work, but to autograph-seeking kids, these soldiers are heroes. They visit the schools and ask the teachers to come back to work, go to classrooms the Iraqi army has filled with weapons. Along the road, the soldiers pick up rocket-propelled grenades pointed out by kids. That gets Sergeant Harden a flower and dozens of handshakes.
Well, I got 7 kids at home, and I like kids. And I want to see them grow up, at least do something in their life that they always wanted to. Now they get a chance, and that's good.
There's a kind of carnival atmosphere to all of this. Soldiers out to win the hearts and minds of people already have the hearts of the children. But to keep public support, they say they will have to fix city services quickly.
It will take months to get all the power and water on. In the meantime, the residents ask about law and order.
What kind of police force?
Any kind, but we need the law. We need the law.
For now, what little law there is, being provided by U.S. soldiers who hope their efforts are enough to satisfy most Iraqis. Dana Lewis, NBC News, Baghdad.
But first, another view from the front lines. NBC's Dana Lewis with the 101st Airborne in Baghdad, facing the ongoing dangers in that war zone.
In the former Ba'ath Party headquarters, as the 101st Strike Brigade prepared to remove abandoned weapons, Specialist Mark Higashimura said they were attacked with a grenade.
One of the guys who got hit was like on the other side of the doorway. Like it blasted and knocked me on my butt.
Soldiers say the grenade came over this wall, exploded even before it hit the ground, and then snipers started firing from these rooftops. A gunfight that lasted for more than 30 minutes.
In the war, most of the action that we saw, of course, was on the ground, but there was no shortage of air combat as well, some of it up close and personal. Tonight, NBC's Dana Lewis with a helicopter outfit that conjures up images of the Old West.
In the tradition of America's old cavalry, Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Schiller wears a Stetson, Wild West holster, and rides off in pursuit of the bad guys.
They know the deal. We're going to wreak havoc on them if they try anything silly.
He is the commander of 217 Cavalry, spurring on a Kiowa helicopter for the 101st Airborne. U.S. soldiers who get pinned by rooftop fire, cornered by Iraqi ambushes, routinely call on Schiller's Kiowas for help. They get protection from above, rockets and .50 caliber machine gun fire. Schiller and his airborne partner, Douglas Ford, say the helicopter rattles when the trigger is pressed.
The saying is grit your teeth, because if you don't, you're going to get them chipped.
When the slow-moving Apache helicopters were fired on and pulled back in An-Najaf, Schiller and his Kiowas, fast and more maneuverable, stayed in the fight and won the respect of soldiers on the ground who needed airborne cover. Schiller's helicopter was hit by ground fire.
Could feel the funk in the aircraft, and we were both for a couple of seconds wondering if the aircraft was still going to fly, and it did.
There's been a lot of thunks here and there, and this bullet lodged directly under his seat.
Here, probably every time we've flown in and shot at.
That's why Schiller has more good luck charms around his neck than you can count.
How do these cowboys of the sky judge success? Well, in this war, 12 of their helicopters have been damaged by enemy fire, but none have been shot down, and they have destroyed hundreds of enemy positions.
I believe that you have to do a little bit of risk in order to turn the tide of the battle, but I also tell my guys, you've got to be bold but not stupid, and that's a fine line. Oh, you want to fly again, don't you?
Stephen Schiller and Douglas Ford have together flown that fine line so well in their Kiowa, they will be nominated for a Distinguished Flying Cross.
cowboys over Iraq. Dana Lewis, NBC News, Baghdad.
That's not the news for Wednesday. I'm Tom Brokaw. I'll see you tomorrow night.
This is Dana Lewis with the 101st Airborne Division in An-Najaf. American forces started to take this town at noon today. First, they fired volleys of artillery shells. The smoke allowed them to advance. Units from the 101st Airborne Division, the infantry, pushed forward under the cover of Apache attack helicopters. As U.S. forces pushed into the center of the city, suddenly quiet streets became filled with hundreds and hundreds of people welcoming them. Some waved American flags. Most people just came out of their homes, gave the thumbs up to U.S. soldiers, and tried to touch them or shake their hands. In the heart of An-Najaf, commanders say some gunmen went into the Ali Mosque, a sacred religious site to Shia Muslims in Iraq. There are reports the gunmen attempted to fire on American soldiers from the mosque, but U.S. troops tried to be restrained. They were under orders to avoid hitting the mosque with gunfire if possible. Tonight, American forces say they are firmly in control of An-Najaf, so much so that they are already making plans to move north again towards Baghdad. Dana Lewis, NBC News, An-Najaf, Iraq.